So let me take a moment to welcome everyone to our Lunch and Learn here in September. We're welcoming John Westfall. He's the executive director at ROCovery Fitness here in Rochester. And his topic today is about spirituality and addiction. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself and get us started.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and thanks for having me today. And certainly, John understated their connection to ROCovery. They help us out immensely every year, and helped us out again with our 5K and came and volunteered and did what they could to help out, which is always incredibly helpful. We are so reliant upon volunteer assistance, every day. So we really appreciate everyone who gives of their time and their resources the way the messengers have over the years to ROCovery. So as Marianne had mentioned, I am the executive director of ROCovery Fitness, but I am also a person in long-term sustained recovery, having recently just celebrated 6.5 years of recovery. And what that means for me is that I've lived for the last 6.5 years without a drop of alcohol or any drugs in my system, which for me is a big deal. Most of my adult life has been spent in and out of recovery with short stints of sobriety, but certainly nothing more than 6 to 9 months for most of my adult life until this recent adventure in recovery, I should say, for which I credit my connection to ROCovery Fitness, because it's the only thing that is different now than what has been since I was, I don't know, I probably started blackout drinking when I was 12 years old even. So for me, it's been a very, very long time. I'm now 53. 53? Yeah, 53 years old. There was a time in my life I didn't think I would live to see 21. So that's kind of a big deal. But anyway, I digress. So I am here to talk about spirituality and recovery, but I wanted to go through our ROCovery presentation. I'm not sure. I don't think I have the whole hour allotted to me. Do I, Marianne?
Yeah, you have all the time.
Oh my goodness.
You need there of that hour.
So I'm going to share a little presentation that we put out in the community whenever we speak to anyone in the community about ROCovery Fitness. So it's going to go through a little background. There's even a little interesting video clip in there that we like to share. And then I'll talk about a little bit of my own journey and how spirituality relates to my recovery. So I am going to find in my, this is always a challenge because I have so many windows open on my computer at any given moment. It's like, where do I find that one again? Here we go. So I'm going to start my show, slideshow, play from start. All right, so there we go. You even got the dramatic glass breaking. That was really cool. I wasn't expecting that. Okay, so our tagline is sober living through fitness. Now, fitness isn't the only pathway of recovery that we promote, but it certainly is our primary pathway of recovery. Fitness or just activity. People have a lot of, I feel like the word fitness is often misunderstood. But anyway, I digress. I'll get into that later. Our simple mission is ROCovery Fitness is a supportive community of physically active individuals brought together by sober living, committed to creating an environment of healing and recovery. Members, volunteers, friends, and families are empowered to discover their inner strength and confidence through adventure, fun, and camaraderie. That's sort of our published mission statement. For better or worse, that's what it's always been. Our goal is to foster a safe, supportive, and inclusive environment for healing and recovery, to help individuals rediscover their inner strength and resilience through fun, fitness, and sober social connection. We are a not-for-profit, community-based social care provider, bringing fitness and non-fitness-based classes and events, as well as peer recovery support services to individuals in our community. All of our programs are free and open to anyone with at least 48 hours of continuous sobriety. We welcome friends, family members, and anyone who chooses to live a sober lifestyle. We capitalize that word anyone because we get asked all the time. I identify as somebody in recovery from substance use or from alcohol or from whatever, anyone with 48 hours of continuous sobriety. So we host an overeating anonymous disorder meeting here. We gambling anonymous, like any pathway of recovery, we're all in recovery from something. And as long as you have that 48 hours of sobriety and fill out our questionnaire, our quick 5-minute little questionnaire, which does nothing more than give us demographics to help us apply for grants and things like that, anyone can come to our center. Does sobriety mean any alcohol? Yes, it does. 48 hours without anything in your system. Now, again, we don't stand at the door with a breathalyzer. It's very much an on your honor system. So, but we do have people who will come. It doesn't happen as often as you would think, but there occasionally are people who will come in under the influence. As people in recovery, we can typically spot it pretty quickly. We have pretty good noses. We have pretty keen senses these days to be able to detect when there's somebody under the influence or recently, so 48 hours is a guideline. It's not like if it's been 40 hours, I'm not going to know. So, it's just kind of a guideline. So anyway. How did it begin? So that's a really good question. On a frigid February day in 2015, it started with a post on social media. It was a Facebook hike. A group of people who didn't normally hang out all got together for a hike, and it kind of grew from there. Everyone wanted to do it the next week, even though it was probably the coldest day of the year. They say it was the coldest day of the year. I wasn't around. I wasn't in recovery yet. It was still a couple of years before I got into recovery. Our founders instantly realized they unearthed something special. They had discovered something to fill the void that had been missing in their lives, in the lives of many in the recovery community. Inadvertently, they created a beautiful gift for the Rochester community with the founding of ROCovery Fitness, a missing piece of the recovery puzzle for many in the continuum of care to those who are suffering and reaching out for help. So when people get out of treatment or incarceration or any of the formal pathways that we often take to getting into sobriety to begin with, there tends to be sort of okay, when those services stop, you're just kind of left to your own devices. And back then that was, pretty much the standard operating procedure. And that's where a lot of us, return to use after, any given amount of time. So it kind of just became that bridge between formal treatment or formal services and nothing. There's a great picture of our safe, supportive environment. We always have some ropes for people to catch you if you start backsliding. Our members and staff. So the organization is made up of members who have personal experience in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction and other addictions. Not to say that those are the only ones that we have identified. They have a sense of passion for service to give back to the community and or are driven to make a difference to help combat current community trends. All are welcome to join the ROCovery family. Our only requirement visiting the outreach center and participating in classes or events is that 48 hours of continuous sobriety. Research shows fitness works, right? It's no secret. It affects the endorphins in our brains. There's a lot of research out there, and we can certainly quote it. But the benefits of physical activity on the brain and health occur immediately after a session of moderate to vigorous physical activity, such as the reduced feelings of the state of anxiety, short-term anxiety, improved sleep, and improved aspects of cognitive function. With regular physical activity, it becomes a habitual effect. The improvements are seen in trait anxiety or longer-term anxiety, deeper sleep, and components of executive functioning, including the ability to plan and organize, monitor, inhibit, or facilitate behaviors, initiate tasks, and control emotions. Through programs, practices, and policies, communities can help individuals overcome these challenges and make physical activity the easy choice. And mental health and substance use disorder is also no secret. Many of folks with either diagnosis are often diagnosed with both, right? And whether one came before the other, it really doesn't matter. Sometimes substance use comes along to, act as a coping mechanism for mental health disorders, or sometimes the mental health disorders are a result of the substance use or alcohol use. Regardless of the horse or the cart, this slide says 45%. I would say it's probably much higher than that. So there's a lot of co-occurring mental health and substance use. So we have many members who would probably identify more as struggling with mental health issues than substance use being their primary. And a lot of times when the substance use is gone, it's the mental health problems that sort of come to the surface and are things that we have to deal with, rather than resorting back to those old coping mechanisms. There's a great picture of us hiking in the Adirondack Mountains in the winter, which we absolutely love to do. With dogs even. So some of the activities that we offer, and these are just some of them, the list is way too long, and the type would be very, very small and hard to read. But we have open gym hours 6 of the 7 days a week. And on that 7th day on Sunday, we even have a class that every other week happens in. So we try and have something happening every day of the week, because our addiction doesn't take a rest on Sunday. It doesn't take a rest Saturday evening, right? So we want to give something for somebody to do when they're struggling, no matter what day that is or time of the day that is. So our open gym hours are Monday through Thursday, 8 to 7, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Friday and Saturday, 8 to 1. And then you can see a list of all the fitness and non-fitness based classes that we have. Mutual aid groups, we host several of them here at our center. Addiction loss bereavement support group for families and friends who have lost those to addiction. A men's support group, LGBTQ plus support group. There's a warrior moms group. There's all kinds of stuff. So just take a look at our web calendar and you can see everything that we have to offer. Additional things that we do outside of the center, tons of them. Like I mentioned, Adirondack camping, we go every few weeks. Hiking, bicycling, running, we do every Friday night. We have a Friday night trail run. We do camping. We haven't done a fishing trip in a while, but we do fishing trips. Ice skating in the winter, sledding, skiing, tubing, holiday dinners, any holiday, because they can be very triggering for many folks. And whether that's, traditional drinking holiday or just family gatherings being very stressful for folks. And I think they can be stressful for everyone, even, people who are not in recovery. We'd like to have a safe, supportive place for people to go to during those times as well. Some people don't have families anymore, or those connections haven't been rebuilt yet. So we like to give people a safe, sober, supportive place to go. And we're coming up on the holidays. We certainly know how triggering those can be for folks. So we do Thanksgiving. We have a flag football game and a dinner, which is probably one of our biggest attended events, holiday dinner events every year. It's a Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We do a holiday party in December, and then a New Year's Eve party as well. And then there's some ice skating. It's a couple of our members and our volunteers ice skating, and some more hiking pictures and dog pictures. And just a little about our peer recovery support services. So in 2019, we partnered with FLIPS, who is it's Finger Lakes Performing Provider Services in a system transformation pilot program. So we were given some grant money to embed CRPAs, who are certified recovery peer advocates, credentialed recovery support specialists, in non-traditional community settings to engage those who may be struggling with substance use disorder. So anywhere that somebody enters formal services with, so they identified these settings as primary care or the doctor's office. educational system, certainly the justice system, and substance use disorder treatment settings. So we had a grant, employed some folks, including myself, in 2019 to connect with folks in those areas, to connect with them as a community-based supporter who didn't have sort of a if you're connected with a peer, let's say in the justice system, if the justice system employs peers, your cycle of contact with that peer is only going to be as long as you're engaged with the justice system. Or if you're in treatment and they employ peers, well, as long as you have an active case with that treatment provider, you'll have that peer support. But once you graduate from there, you're not one of their clients anymore, their service recipients. So the idea is to have a community-based support who we stay connected with that individual no matter where they're at. They could go to 3 different treatment providers and we're still going to be connected with them. So that was sort of the idea behind that program. And it's continued on with other funders in different ways. So I'll talk about that in a minute as well. So what does our outreach and engagement team or our peer recovery support specialists help with? They help individuals recognize and achieve goals as they relate to that individual's recovery. So we're not there to tell them what's going to work for them, but we're there to help them identify what works for them and help them with connections to do that. We help to improve overall health and well-being. It's a really holistic approach. It's mind, body, and spirit. It's, we help with all of those things. We can help connect them with the appropriate recovery tools and resources. So if they don't have a primary care doctor, if they don't have a dentist, if they don't have, social connection to social services, and they really could benefit from that, we help them with those connections. And we just walk alongside the individuals. We don't lead them, but we'll walk alongside them on their journey of wellness and recovery. So that is kind of what our team helps them with. And so there's some contact information. So anyone who is interested in peer recovery support services can call, even if they're even still in active use and addiction. We can support them out in the community, because people always ask, well, I don't have 48 hours. What can you do for me? Well, we can help you get there if that's what you want. Or we can connect with you out in the community and talk about, moderation, or what does your recovery pathway look like to you, right? We have certain reasons for having that 48 hours here at our center. It's for the safety of those who do choose to live an abstinence-based pathway of recovery, and for safety, of course. We can't have people under the influence lifting weight over their head. Our insurance company wouldn't like that too much. But that doesn't mean we can't help in some way, and so that's the way we can help. And then our outreach services, which we do a lot of outreach like this presentation that I'm giving now. But we have outreach teams that go out to wellness fairs, information tables at various locations in Rochester, different events. We do presentations at treatment facilities, several every month, actually. We do presentations at schools, many, Greece Central School, as being a large school district here, constantly reach out to us and ask us to come give presentations at the school to different grade levels, often in the health class environment. We give presentations in medical health fields. We very often will go to Strong, U of R, people entering the field, the addictions and treatment field, or the medical field. They're required to take a certain number of hours, and we feel like it could always be more in regards to addiction. But we will go and talk to those classes. The young people entering the fields and the point of contact for people suffering with SUD is very important for us to open their minds to seeing individuals as human and not as flawed. So that's what we try and do. Not only with medical health fields, we also, with law enforcement, get involved, and we partner with a group that trains young people who are interested in getting involved in law enforcement. They come and volunteer at our center and our events and things like that. So we can sort of bridge that huge gap there is between the professional fields and people who are suffering with SUD, to get each other to see each other as human. Tours of our outreach center daily happen. Presentations or information tables at local businesses also happens as well. So very busy. We rely on our volunteers for a lot of that work because we're only so many staff members. Just some statistics, and these are very vague and ambiguous, but I can tell you just these are comfortable sort of ballpark figures. Volunteer hours logged each year, over 5,100 hours of volunteer hours are logged with our center every year at all of the things that I discussed there. Events held by us each year. This is fitness and non-fitness based classes plus open gym. There's over 350 events that we have every year. Unique touch points, over 8,500 unique individuals touched every year, whether through outreach or our classes and activities. We have over 100 active volunteers every year. A full-time staff, we currently have 11. We've been anywhere from 1 to 12. So currently we're at 11. Total members, we just surpassed 8,300 membership questionnaires on file since we started keeping digital records in 2016. And then outreach events every year, we're over 100 outreach events where we're doing, presentations or tabling or, what have you. So that's kind of what our activity looks like every year in statistics. And then we advocate. We go to Albany, we march, we are on the news. We just were on the news like a bunch of times because of our 5K. Actually kind of tired of talking at this point, but but we advocate. We're here to be the voices of every friend we've ever lost and people who are still actively suffering. It's our job, our duty to speak for those who can't, for those who don't have a voice right now for any reason, whether they're marginalized or they're no longer with us. We advocate, and we are constantly educating our volunteers and our staff members on how to be better advocates for those folks in our community. And as I promised, have a short little video clip I'd like to share with you. And this is one, it's a few years old, and he still uses some stigmatizing language in there, but it's a very great TED Talk that I have often used. It helps. There's a little segment of it that helps describe what ROCovery Fitness is about, how it was, why it works, and some of the research behind it. So it's maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but I'm going to play it now. I should be able to play it now. Oh no, it's not going to work for me.
You may have to select like enable video sound or something when you share a screen.
Yeah, I might. Huh.
So you could stop sharing and then share again and click the box down. It's usually in the left-hand corner.
So there we go. I'm usually much more prepared than this. Sorry.
Hey, John, if you're looking for the box, you have to, as Mary Ann said, you have to stop sharing and then start it again, and that's when you'll see the box to check. If that's the issue, I'm not sure, but it might be.
Oh, we will see.
There you go.
Optimize for video clip, share sound.
Now try. Not cooperating, huh?
Not cooperating. You know what I'm going to do? I am going to go to my browser
Ah,
and load it there. And then oh, it won't let me do it. Huh. Well, that's neat. Anyway, I will share a link to it and you can watch it after our discussion. Yeah. So I will do that. Let me go back. and find it.
could you hear that?
What's that?
If you put the link in the chat, maybe I can grab it.
Yeah. We'll do that. I will do that. Hi, Jackie. Welcome.
All right,
You got it?
think so. We'll see. It's kind of weird there. What's happening here? Are you seeing this?
Just a blank screen.
Nope.
How about now?
Nope.
Really?
Just a blank screen.
Oh, sorry. Something's weird there. Okay, but now it's there. So let me see.
Can everyone see mine? Looks like it. You can see it?
Hey, okay.
Yay. All right, cool.
One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I was just a little kid, so I didn't really understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had drug addiction in my family, including later cocaine addiction. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, partly because it's now exactly 100 years since drugs were first banned in the United States and Britain, and we then imposed that on the rest of the world. It's a century since we made this really fateful decision to take addicts and punish them and make them suffer because we believed that would deter them, it would give them an incentive to stop. And a few years ago, I was looking at some of the addicts in my life who I love and trying to figure out if there was some way to help them. And I realized there were loads of incredibly basic questions I just didn't know the answer to. Like, what really causes addiction? Why do we carry on with this approach that doesn't seem to be working? And is there a better way out there that we could try instead? So I read loads of stuff about it, and I couldn't really find the answers I was looking for. So I thought, okay, I'll go and sit with different people around the world who've lived this and studied this and talk to them and see if I can learn from them. And I didn't realize I would end up going over 30,000 miles at the start, but I ended up going and meeting loads of different people, from a transgender crack dealer in Brownsville, Brooklyn, to a scientist who spends a lot of time feeding hallucinogens to mongooses to see if they like them. It turns out they do, but only in very specific circumstances. To the only country that's ever decriminalized all drugs, from cannabis to crack, Portugal. And the thing I realized that really blew my mind is almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. And if we start to absorb the new evidence about addiction, I think we're going to have to change a lot more than our drug policies. But let's start with what we think we know, what I thought I know, right? Let's think about this middle row here, right? Imagine all of you for 20 days now went off and used heroin 3 times a day. Some of you look a little bit more enthusiastic than others at this prospect. Don't worry, it's just a thought experiment. Imagine you did that, right? What would happen? Now, we have a story about what would happen that we've been told for a century. We think because there are chemical hooks in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body would become dependent on those hooks, you'd start to physically need them, and at the end of those 20 days, you'd all be heroin addicts, right? That's what I thought. First thing that alerted me to the fact something not right with this story is when it was explained to me, if I step out of this TED Talk today and I get hit by a car and I break my hip, I'll be taken to hospital and I'll be given loads of diamorphine. Diamorphine is heroin. It's actually much better heroin than you're ever going to buy on the streets, because the stuff you buy from a drug dealer is contaminated, actually very little of it is heroin, whereas the stuff you get from the doctor is medically pure. And you'll be given it for quite a long period of time. There are loads of people in this room who may not realize that you've taken quite a lot of heroin, right? And anyone watching this anywhere in the world, this is happening. And if what we believe about addiction is right, those people are exposed to all those chemical hooks. What should happen? They should become addicts. This has been studied really carefully. It doesn't happen. You will have noticed if your grandmother had a hip replacement, she didn't come out as a junkie. And when I learned this, it just seemed so weird to me, so contrary to everything I'd been told, everything I thought I knew. I just thought it couldn't be right. Until I went and met a man called Bruce Alexander, who's a professor of psychology in Vancouver, who carried out an incredible experiment that I think really helps us to understand this issue. Professor Alexander explained to me, the idea of addiction we've all got in our heads, that story, comes partly from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple experiments. You can do them tonight when you go home if you feel a little bit sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage, and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of colored balls, they've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. Now, when he first saw this, Professor Alexander thought, maybe this is just a thing about rats. They're quite different to us, maybe not as different as we'd like, but, But fortunately, there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study, and what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped. Now, if you believe the story about chemical hooks, that makes absolutely no sense. But Professor Alexander began to think there might be a different story about addiction. He said, what if addiction isn't about your chemical hooks? What if addiction is about your cage? What if addiction is an adaptation to your environment? Looking at this, there was another professor called Peter Cohen in the Netherlands who said, maybe we shouldn't even call it addiction. Maybe we should call it bonding. Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond. And when we're happy and healthy, we'll bond and connect with each other. But if you can't do that because you're traumatized or isolated or beaten down by life, you will bond with something that will give you some sense of relief. Now, that might be gambling, that might be pornography, that might be cocaine, that might be cannabis, but you will bond and connect with something because that's our nature. That's what we want as human beings. And I think, at first I found this quite a difficult thing to get my head around, but one way that helped me to think about it is, and I can see, I've got over by my seat there a bottle of water, right? I'm looking at lots of you, and lots of you have bottles of water with you, right? Forget drugs, forget the drug war. Totally legally, all of those bottles of water could be bottles of vodka, right? We could all be getting drunk, I might after this. But we're not, right? Now, because you've been able to afford the approximately a gazillion pounds that it costs to get into a TED Talk, I'm guessing you guys could afford to be drinking vodka for the next 6 months. You wouldn't end up homeless. You're not going to do that. And the reason you're not going to do that is not because anyone's stopping you. It's because you've got bonds and connections that you want to be present for. You've got work you love. You've got people you love. You've got healthy relationships. And a core part of addiction, I came to think, and I believe the evidence suggests, is about not being able to bear to be present in your life. Now, this has really significant implications. The most obvious implications are for the war on drugs, right? In Arizona, I went out with a group of women who were made to wear T-shirts saying I was a drug addict and go out on chain gangs and dig graves while members of the public could jeer at them. And when those women get out of prison, they're going to have criminal records that mean they'll never work in the legal economy again. Now, that's a very extreme example, obviously, in the case of the chain gang, but actually almost everywhere in the world we treat addicts to some degree like that. We punish them, we shame them, we give them criminal records, we put barriers between them reconnecting. There was a doctor in Canada, Dr. Gabor Mate, an amazing man, who said to me, if you wanted to design a system that would make addiction worse, you would design that system. Now, there's a place that decided to do the exact opposite, and I went there to see how it worked. In the year 2000, Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin, which is kind of mind-blowing. And every year, they tried the American way more and more. They punished people and stigmatized them and shamed them more. And every year, the problem got worse. And one day, the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition got together and basically said, look, we can't go on with a country where we're having ever more people becoming heroin addicts. Let's set up a panel of scientists and doctors to figure out what would genuinely solve the problem. And they set up a panel led by an amazing man called Dr. João Goulão to look at all this new evidence. And they came back and they said, decriminalize all drugs, from cannabis to crack. But, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we used to spend on cutting addicts off, on disconnecting them, and spend it instead on reconnecting them with the society. And that's not, essentially, that's not really what we think of. What they did wasn't really what we think of as drug treatment in the United States and Britain. So they do residential rehab, they do psychological therapy that does have some value. But the biggest thing they did was the complete opposite of what we do. A massive program of job creation for addicts and microloans for addicts to set up small businesses. So say you used to be a mechanic. When you're ready, they go to a garage and they'll say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. The goal was to make sure that every addict in Portugal had something to get out of bed for in the morning. And when I went and met the addicts in Portugal, it was fascinating. What they said is, as they rediscovered purpose, they rediscovered bonds and relationships with the wider society. It'll be 15 years this year since that experiment began, and the results are in. Injecting drug use is down in Portugal, according to the British Journal of Criminology, by 50%, 50%. Overdose is massively down. HIV is massively down among addicts. Addiction in every study is significantly down. One of the ways you know it's worked so well is that almost nobody in Portugal wants to go back to the old system. Now, that's the kind of political implications. I actually think there's a layer of implications to all this research below that. You know, we live in a culture where people feel really increasingly vulnerable to all sorts of addictions, whether it's to their smartphones or to shopping or to eating. You know, before these talks began, you guys know this, that we were told we weren't allowed to have our smartphones on. And I have to say, a lot of you looked an awful lot like addicts who were being told their dealer was going to be unavailable for the next couple of hours. And yeah, a lot of us feel like that. And it might sound weird to say, oh, you know, I've been talking about how disconnection is a major driver of addiction. But weird to say it's growing because you think, well, we're the most connected society there's ever been, surely. But I increasingly began to think that the connection we have, the connections we have, we think we have, are like a kind of parody of human connection. If you have a crisis in your life, you'll notice something. It won't be your Twitter followers who come to sit with you. It won't be your Facebook friends who help you turn it round. It'll be your flesh and blood friends who you have deep and nuanced and textured face-to-face relationships with. And I think there's a study I learned about from Bill McKibben, the environmental writer, I think tells us a lot about this. It looked at the number of close friends the average American believes they can call on in a crisis. That number has been declining steadily since the 1950s. The amount of floor space an individual has in their home has been steadily increasing. And I think that's like a metaphor for the choice we've made as a culture, right? We've traded floor space for friends, we've traded stuff for connections, and the result is that we are one of the loneliest societies there has ever been. And yet, Bruce Alexander, the guy who did the Rat Park experiment, says, we talk all the time in addiction about individual recovery, and it's right to talk about that, but we need to talk much more about social recovery. Something's gone wrong with us, not just as individuals, but as a group. And we've created a society where, for a lot of us, life looks a whole lot more like that isolated cage and a whole lot less like Rat Park. But if I'm honest, this isn't why I went into it, right? I didn't go in to discover the political stuff, the social stuff. I wanted to know how to help the people I love. And when I came back from this long journey and I'd learned all this, I looked at the addicts in my life, and if you're really candid, it's hard loving an addict, and there's going to be lots of people who know in this room you're angry a lot of the time. And I think one of the reasons why this debate is so charged is because it runs through the heart of each of us, right? Everyone has a bit of them that looks at an addict and thinks, I wish someone would just stop you. And the kind of script we're told for how to deal with the addicts in our life is typified by, I think, by the reality show Intervention. If you guys haven't seen it, I think everything in our lives is typified by reality TV, but that's another TED Talk. If you've never seen the show Intervention, it's a pretty simple premise. You get an addict, all the people in their life, gather them together, and say, if you don't shape up, confront them with what they're doing, and they say, if you don't shape up, we're going to cut you off, right? So what they do is they take the connection to the addict and they threaten it. They make it contingent on the addict behaving the way they want. And I began to see why that approach doesn't work. And I began to think that almost that's like the importing of the logic of the drug war into our private lives. So I was thinking, well, how can I be Portuguese, right? And what I try to do now, and I can't tell you I do it consistently, and I can't tell you it's easy, is to say to the addicts in my life that I want to deepen the connection with them, to say to them, I love you whether you're using or you're not. I love you whatever state you're in, and if you need me, I'll come and sit with you, because I love you and I don't want you to be alone or to feel alone. And I think the core of that message, you're not alone, we love you, has to be at every level of how we respond to addicts, socially, politically, and individually. For 100 years now, we've been singing war songs about addicts. I think all along we should have been singing love songs to them, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was the video I was trying to share. So it's a few years old now, but it's still, I think it encapsulates a lot of ROCovery, why we started, what we're doing, and why it works, right? It's about that connection. It's about giving a not just a connection, but a connection with other people who can relate to what somebody might be going through. And, he touches on it, but he doesn't really delve down into it, but a purpose, right? And he touched on that a little bit. It gives us a purpose, and in volunteering, I can tell you that was one of the biggest things that made a difference in my recovery journey this time, and why I credit ROCovery with that success in literally saving and changing my life, was giving me that sense of purpose, giving me something to work towards and for. And as we're here today, to talk about spirituality has a lot to do with that, right? It was and this is all I can talk about, is my experience and my journey, was a lot about trusting God and praying and meditating, right? Praying is me talking to God, meditating is me listening. And I did a lot of that, and I still do a lot of that in my recovery. And I kind of made a deal with God and said, I was 47 years old, had graphic design and marketing as my background. And I was working, out of my house. I had a kid in college and 3 more on the way. And, I switched my careers from owning my own, graphic design and marketing business to getting into the highly lucrative and glamorous field of human services. Who does that, right? But I kind of made a deal with God and said, you keep opening these doors, I'll keep walking through them, and trust that, you'll find a way that I'll be able to take care of myself and support, not take care of myself, but myself and my family, and just go with it. And so it hasn't, ever since I made that deal, it hasn't steered me wrong. I was able to do that, and to, because honestly, the job that I had, it was a lot of alcohol marketing and design and packaging and stuff like that. So my life had been so revolved around alcohol and addiction that I couldn't even recognize it. And so, God, my higher power, found a way for me to break out of that and to get into a place in my life where I could be of service, and I could have more purpose and more meaning for my life. And I've always looked at, and in fact, I have a wristband that has Romans passage on it, Romans 8:28, that says, God will use everything for good in our lives if we, are called to his purpose. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but so I've always looked at that and said, the bad things that have happened in my life and the bad things that I've done, I'm not going to let them just be, but I'm actually going to use them for good. Anything bad that's happened in my life, I'm going to find a way to use that for good. And it's really ROCovery that's allowed me, it's sort of supercharged that for me. Could I continue to go to 12-step meetings? Absolutely. But that, for me, it wasn't enough. And I know you can go to meetings, and you can go to meetings all day if you wanted to, all over the city, but to sit in a room and just talk about what I didn't want to do, it wasn't enough for me. It wasn't until I found ROCovery that I found that greater purpose and that ability to to give back in ways that I couldn't do another way. And I had to make my whole life about recovery. And that's what I did. So, yeah. So,
John, as you were talking, I was also thinking, we were talking about, it wasn't until you could give back that you could actually engage your own recovery. And I'm thinking, if you give back, it means you have something to give. Like, it means that you have some self-worth, right?
yeah.
So I wonder if there's a connection there, that if I'm giving, I'm worth something, which increases your self-esteem, your feelings of self-confidence, your sense of worthiness in the larger sense, in the spiritual as well as the societal realm.
Yeah.
You're worth something.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, as Johann says in his TED Talk, that's a lot of what keeps us sick, is our own lack of self-worth, right? Like, I'm not worthy of that. I'm not, who am I to have these great things in my life? And it's a lot of it is just, it sort of snowballs, right? It all goes down to that self-worth. And the funny thing is, the more you're focused on other people and helping other people, the less you're thinking about yourself. So it really becomes this less focused on self, more focused on others. So I'm not seeking self interests or worried about self problems or woe is me. I'm not in that mentality, because I'm thinking about somebody else or something else bigger than myself. I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, I was just saying, it's like, my favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life, and the way Clarence starts to help George Bailey is by Clarence jumping into the water, and then George goes from woe is me to, oh, I got to help that guy, and he dives in, and the rest is history. But Excellent, John. Really wonderful. You know, per the TED Talk, if connections are key, then the relationship with God is the primary connection that sets everything else in motion. And I thought you captured that really well too. So
Thanks. Yeah, our first, best, biggest connection to rebuild.
I just wanted to thank you for this. It's very moving and powerful and meaningful. And I appreciate you sharing your own journey. I have a couple of questions. One has to do with your funding. I just was curious where that comes from. But the other has to do with how complicated it is when mental health issues are a part of addiction. When I visit patients in the mental health unit and hear their stories, I mean, it so resonate with what you're saying and what Johan is saying. But then I think of this very complicated how to help someone reconnect when there's so many obstacles, trauma, and layers of difficulty in the way.
Yeah, that is, I would say that's probably one of our biggest, well, you've touched on two incredibly challenging facets of our work. First of all is funding. That's like my primary job function, is to chase funding constantly. I often refer to myself as a professional beggar, but our 5K that we just had over the weekend is our biggest single fundraising event. So our private donations and grants are our two major funding resources. And grants being government grants or foundation grants or any kind of grants. Those are our biggest. So of our 11 staff members, 9 are funded directly through grant programs. So they're grants that are specifically gifted for that specific work that they're doing. And then some of, additionally, myself and the other staff member also are covered by, part of some of those grants as well. But the rest of it is, made up by donations, either our 5K fundraiser, or then we have other smaller fundraisers throughout the year. So those are two of our main funding mechanisms, and typically they're, specifically funding specific work that we do in the community. The second question about the mental health is really challenging, and particularly when talking about individuals who have significant mental health diagnoses and challenges that impair cognitive functioning, oftentimes, almost always, we make sure they're connected with proper mental health resources. So getting them connected with people in the community that can help with those things, because that is outside of our expertise, if you will. So making sure that they're connected and helping them to get those connections in place, and then helping encourage them to utilize them for their benefit, because we can't make anyone do anything they don't want to do. When it becomes a problem is when their challenges become so great that it's not safe for them to be in our environment anymore. Because again, we always have to support our main mission, which is to create a safe, supportive, and inclusive environment. So we're going to be inclusive of that person as long as they're on board with that mission and helping us with that mission. It's when their behaviors and complications make it unsafe for others, then we have to do what's in the best interest of our larger community. And that is, unfortunately, it comes down to the fact that sometimes we do have to ask people not to be present in our community center. But again, just like somebody who's in active addiction as well, we will support them in any way that we can. So.
Thank you.
The difference too between a mental health bump and mental illness.
Right.
And,
Right. There's acute instances and then there's chronic instances of, yeah.
right, and trauma is a big part of it, I think, and having a trauma-informed approach. And do you do training with your people on trauma-informed care?
We are constantly involved in trainings in the continuing education side of things. So yeah, anything as it relates to our work, we
Yeah.
will seek out and have staff attend trainings. Unfortunately, it's 12 o'clock and I have another meeting I have to run to. I'm so sorry to have to. That went by way faster than I thought it was going to. I have
We really
a meeting
appreciate
with my
having you
finance committee.
here. So thank you for coming and thank you for being a part of this. Our next Lunch and Learn is in November. And Valerie Way from the Monroe County Health Department is going to be talking about wellness, spirituality, and resilience and wellness. So please join us on the third Thursday at 11 a.m.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. It was great to
Thanks,
be.
John.
Thank you.